This is New Atheism, a post-mortem. I think this was filmed a while ago, but it was just posted on YouTube last week. We are going to watch, I think the beginning here, we might watch a bit of a bigger chunk just because he's giving some like background, but uh, then we'll get into it. So here we go. And let me know if everything is coming through clear.
That created a situation where it's like, well, let's just leave academia and do something different. So then I got into working for myself in a small business, which I did for the last 8 of the last 10 years or so with my wife, and became academically bored. So I started to study things I was interested in. I got very interested in the science, philosophy of science and religion, and how those things interface with one another. I decided psychology of religion was a more interesting thing to look at, and moral psychology after I read John Haidt's book, The Righteous Mind. And so then I got really deep into that, and I started.
Jonathan Haidt is another person that I'm going to have to break down, I think, on Wednesday's shows, because he's someone that I am really familiar with. I've read most of his books, and I think he's also a fucking idiot. but, but we will pause. Actually, I will give Jonathan Haidt at least some credit, which is that he has done some psychological work that I think is a great contribution to what we know about human psychology, and that is wonderful. So unlike James Lindsay, he's actually done something, contributed to science and the discourse, which is nice. But I will have to talk about Jonathan Haidt another time. I just wanted to pause here to reflect of we, based on what he's saying here, so James Lindsay got his PhD, couldn't get a job in academia, and therefore we now have to suffer because he was bored and decided to read some Jonathan Haidt. So just thought I'd put that out.
Started studying the psychology of religious conversions, religious cults, and other cults, I guess, and trying to get a kind of cohesive picture of what was going on with that kind of a phenomenon. Mm-hmm. And then all of a sudden, the atheism movement, which I was roughly involved with, I wasn't terribly involved with, started to collapse because of wokeness. We didn't call it wokeness then, but basically the Me Too movement, if you will, hit the atheism movement, new atheism movement, probably in 2 rounds in 2008 and then again in 2011. And in 2011, it dealt a fatal blow that killed it by 2015. So we were watching this whole accusation of sexism, racism, mostly sexism, and sometimes homophobia being levied against people to leverage institutional power by bands of activists who are somehow working in a somewhat coordinated fashion, and watched it tear that movement apart. That got us interested in what is the difference between sexism and systemic sexism. So it got us looking into the academic literature in these, what we thought was sociology and gender sociology at the time, but we found out it's gender studies, and we started looking deeply into these so-called studies fields, cultural studies, identity studies, African American studies. You pick the studies, and what we saw horrified us, so that led us to writing the now, I guess, famous series of hoax.
So he's getting into the series of hoaxes. So this is Peter Boghossian, and then later Helen Pluckrose, the throuple, if you will. So Peter Boghossian.
No, please don't call them that. Please don't call them that.
They're a throuple.
Listen. I've listened to all of this very intently for the last 30 minutes. I'm gonna use my chip at that word. I don't want that word for them. No, thank you. I can't do that right now.
So the hoax throuple.
Listen, you little shit. Your Discord's gonna get bombarded in a second. Cut it out.
I mean, the main reason why I wanted to play this in part was because I had released we talked about that one paper that wrote about the new atheism being far right and stuff like this, and I posted that YouTube video, and then we posted the James Lindsay stuff, and there was a thread even in the James Lindsay video. We walked through, I sort of like walked through James Lindsay's history. And I did get a lot of people, like, some of them pushing back or being critical of that history. But, like, James Lindsay is laying it out here that, like, what I was saying was correct. Like, he was motivated by the sort of, like, push for feminism within atheist conferences to then team up with Peter Boghossian to push this, like, line about being against social justice and then critical race theory and all this stuff. So it does come out of his, like, confrontations within the atheist movement. And I do think that is an important like historical note to hit upon. It's just like amazing how then he's going to frame it. I'm not exactly sure what he's referring to about 2008 specifically. I do know what he's talking about in 2011, and we'll get to it in a second. But in 2008, like I think all that was happening was that you had more feminist leaning speakers at the conferences, which is like what like yeah, because like I mean we'll get to it in a bit, but there's an obvious reason why you would have feminism finding common ground within the atheist movement, which is that one of the main sources of a patriarchal worldview was in the Western context where a lot of these conferences were happening is in Christian religion. So there was an obvious like bridge there. But obvious like what's going to happen is that's going to create tension because you have a lot of people like James Lindsay who I would argue is a bit sensitive on this topic. You heard it here. Jody refuses to accommodate people of color. I'm sorry, Elron. I'll try better. All right.
No, it's
Can
not
we
all right,
call
actually.
them? Can we call them a threesome?
Yeah. What's the appropriate word for the three of them then? What's
just a trio, a band, a merry band of idiots. Just not throuple. For fuck's sake. Just give me one thing.
I'll give
One
it to
thing.
you.
That's all I'm asking.
I'll give it to you.
It's also like this whole thing reeks of like the same sort of like Gamergate era reasoning behind getting into like anti-SJW bullshit. Like it's almost like looking at I wanted to say Slimmer, but probably not Sargon. You know what I mean? Just with a less of a British accent.
I think you were hitting on something very potent.
Oh no.
This is what Sam Harris referred to as the estrogen problem in the new atheist movement. For some reason, all of his fans were insufferable, mostly white men, and he did that Principal Skinner meme where he was like, no, it's the women who are wrong. Yeah. No, that's right. I mean, Sam Harris, I mean, like, here's the thing is, like, you had a bunch of the main figures and stuff like this and Dawkins, and we'll get into it. And, like, but then you also had people like Lindsay. Like, it was at every level you had people who were like this, who then really got mad at even feminism being around in these circles. And it came to a height in 2011, and we will touch on that a bit. I think the Gamergate thing might be coming a little too close.
Papers through a kind of bumpy ride. And that launched us into becoming spokespeople on the issue of what's going on in that academic literature. And so Helen and I took what we had already been doing and took it much deeper to try to understand it, and that led to us writing Cynical Theory. So I have this really complicated, this is just the academic side. We haven't even talked about like my family life or any of the other sides of life. Yeah. I had this very odd, fun childhood, really. We grew up on like a steady diet of sort of like 90s semi-postmodern popular culture like Seinfeld, right? A show about nothing, a show that is a self-reflective irony in and of itself, where in fact one of the major themes of the show became making a show about nothing. So making their own show with characters that are named after themselves. And it was very, very influential style of thought and humor.
You mansplaining Seinfeld right now?
I was
Really?
just saying, you tell, like, everyone gets that that's the joke in Seinfeld. Why did you need to explain that? But like, I get the feeling that what's happening here is this was supposed to be some like interview for a documentary to get his like past history, but it is amusing that they're gonna move completely away from any personal stuff and abuse it.
That's like, Jesus Christ! Could you imagine being that old and like, oh, have you ever heard of the show, The Simpsons?
Yeah.
Let me explain to you what The Simpsons about. Like,
It was
know.
a family dynamic where.
Oh my fucking God! I fucking know, James. I lived through it too. It's my life.
I did. Why didn't you say this one out loud? I like this one. The three Muska-fuck sticks. That that fits. I approve of that. Oh, but I'm sorry. Ad hominem. Ad hominem. I apologize to the ad hominem gods. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. We will only stick to rational discourse. Only
Right,
logic words.
just to put that asterisk now, for the people who don't know what an ad hominem is, it's not an ad hominem just to insult someone. I'm not saying James is wrong because he's a fuckstick. I'm just saying he's a fuckstick who's also wrong.
Yes, exactly. Exactly. I think the thing I find the most confusing about how James Lindsay presents himself is he looks like the kind of guy who grows a beard to disguise his weak chin, but like grew the wrong kind of beard, which only obscures his chin. Yeah, sure. I guess he has a weak chin. Look at you. Look at you face shaming.
He looks so uncomfortable and sounds so uncomfortable
Yes.
every time he speaks. Like,
Oddly
how
enough,
does this person have a career when he can't, like, do anything?
because he's saying something that I think is easily monetizable by a certain right-wing demographic that wants to push something. Pretty sure that's it. And I think
It's just like-
his inroad to the atheism, it gives, I think, a lot of conservatives an out to be like, it's not just Christian conservatism when it really is just Christian conservatism.
No, like, because, it would be one thing if you were like that and at all, like, personable or anything, and it's just like, how fucking easy is it for right-wingers to, like, do whatever the hell they want because they can whine a little bit and people will
Just like
give
money.
them money to, like, whine more.
Well, again,
Like,
they're bankrolled by rich people too, so it's not even. It's like the specific people who want to hear this whining and push this whining on other people will just throw money at it. Which is why you look at conservative YouTube versus like left-wing YouTube, there is so much more conservative YouTube. And that's because like a lot of these right-wingers can have huge financial backers who will just throw money at them for saying the correct opinions. Where you don't have that same apparatus on the left, you know?
I think Tim makes a good point in chat.
Is this the Jordan Peterson one?
Yeah.
Like, contrast him with Jordan Peterson, who clearly fires on all cylinders, gets a thrill out of conflict, is compelling to watch when he's talking shit about people. Lindsay looks so unhappy. Can't even posture confidence very well. Yeah. I mean, there's an element. I will say, I watched a video of him recently talking to Michael O'Fallon, who's the leader of Sovereign Nations, and he was a lot more dynamic in that talk. But they were like sitting outside on beach chairs with the wind blowing in their hairs. And he seemed a lot more in his element, I guess. I don't know. But anyways.
So he's just nervous.
Yeah. Maybe. I don't know.
We're playing jokes on each other, like, all growing up this way. So I kind of had a steady diet of that kind of thing on the social side of life, outside of academics. And I don't know, these things have come together pretty well.
So would you say that intellectually your two main passions to date have been the new atheism and postmodernism / social justice?
In the last 10 years, yeah, sure.
Oh, right, of course.
Right, because before then I actually did like the math. And before then I actually liked the physics. And if we really want to go back in time, when I was a teenager, before I decided to major in physics, I wanted to be a meteorologist. I really am interested in weather. Still remain very interested in weather, to be honest with you.
With regard to new atheism and
Just like, there's an element to this interview where it's like, it's weird that like I don't know, maybe like James really doesn't want to talk about any of this shit. All he wants to talk about is like, when I was 12 years old, I used to watch the Weather Channel and Seinfeld.
He perked up there too. Like, he had a little bit of energy and confidence when he got to talk about being a kid and wanted to be a weather boy.
Yeah. You can still be that weather boy, James. Go out there, be that weather boy. We don't need you fighting this fight.
and I'll just say postmodernism. Can you talk a little bit more about the connection between those two things? And first of all, Helen and Peter, did you meet them through your interest in the New Atheism?
Yeah.
You
yeah.
did?
Through Twitter, in fact, more
Oh, okay.
specifically.
Can you talk a little bit about that, and then again, how your views regarding theism are connected, if at all, to your views regarding postmodernism and social justice?
Yeah, so it's actually fairly interesting. Obviously, Helen and I and Peter, we had kind of like a writing relationship shaped like a V, where I was at the vertex. I worked with each of them, but they didn't work with each other for quite a while, a number of years. And each of those relationships started through Twitter, where Peter had read something that I had written on Twitter and then followed me, and we started communicating more often. And then Helen and I had actually started our relationship in a huge argument with one another, and I don't know who was right. I don't even remember what the argument was. I'm sure Helen remembers in excruciating detail why she was correct, but and if she does, then she's wrong. But the first thing I ever said to Peter about Helen was dogging something I'd put on Twitter that she didn't like. I think it was that argument, and I remember talking to Peter, and I was like, I've been dealing with that insufferable Helen Pluckrose all day, because her meticulous focus on detail is sometimes insufferable in the best possible way, I suppose. So that we were working on the New Atheism thing, but of course that made us very aware, so this would have been in 2013, 14, and 15, of the fact that that ship was sinking, and that the iceberg that had struck it was ultimately the feminist aspect.
Let me just cut in there very briefly, because
Sorry, I'm still fixing my camera too. I don't know what's up with my camera today. Really annoying. But I will say, notice how, again, it's his analysis of what happened to atheism, I guess, if that's how you want to describe it, is that feminism somehow showed up, and that's like how it got destroyed, right? And I sort of mentioned this when it comes to the underlying suppositions that he comes with, which is like, couldn't you frame this the other way, which is that you were so obstinate in your rejection to want to sort of like not be a sexist prick, that you caused the conflict by not capitulating to not being a sexist prick, you know? You decided, no, I will remain a sexist prick. And that's what caused the divisions and conflicts. I actually don't know that the best way to frame this is that somehow atheism has collapsed. Because atheist communities still exist. There were still conflicts before the pandemic hit. Or not conferences. So these things still have a community. They're still growing. You still have the Freedom from Religion Foundations, all these things. So it's just weird for him to frame it like the whole movement has ended. Really what you had is a leeching off of a portion. And I think part of that is because there is a growing social justice aspect to atheism, which I actually think in some ways belongs in atheism for good reason. But get to that in a second. When someone points out that a movement has problems, the only reasonable conclusion is that the original thing was fine all along and the criticism is unwarranted attack from outside bad actors. Yes, exactly. I mean, that is largely their argument. I don't know if he makes it in this, but he does stipulate that it's like, this was his argument against Marcuse that I pointed to earlier, which is that like people would be completely happy and ordinary at their work until all of a sudden a critical theorist shows up and tells them why they should hate their job, and then they start to hate their job. When it's like, no, usually what happened is people were miserable, and then people have found a framework for which people can describe why it is they're miserable. You know? But like
James Lindsay is the worst kind of fucking middle manager, isn't
Yeah.
he? He's that guy at work where you're like, hey, boss, like, this is a problem. We need to fix this. It's like, you're the problem because you brought it up. It's like, the ship is still fucking sinking. We just want to plug the hole. Like, you decide if you want to go down or not, man. But, like, the rest of us don't want to fucking die. Come on. Come on.
No, I mean, it's yeah. I mean, but of course, like, it comes back to like again, I want to say like the fragility argument, which again is like me using social justice language. But like, look, he's the one being like, why are you being so mean to me? Why are you telling me to change? I don't want to change. Fuck you. How dare you try to tell me to change? You change. You know what I mean? Like,
feminism is hurting my feelings.
right. Because again, like, it would be interesting to have that discussion. Why? Tell me, James, why is feminism bad? But instead, the conversation we're going to have with a lot of this is how everything links back to Marxism. You know what I mean? Which is like, they're clearly obfuscating the real discussion, which makes this so fucking frustrating. But we'll continue.
Because you said that before, and I wanted to return to it, and then I forgot to. You basically said, if I remember correctly, that feminism or social justice more broadly ended the new atheism.
Oh yeah, wrecked it.
Can you elaborate a little bit on that? Because I've never thought about that.
Once upon a time, I actually got involved with sort of being on the orbit of the new atheism world in about 2010 and 11. So what happened before is sort of fuzzy history to me that people have related to me. My feeling is that it actually looks a lot like Gamergate in the sense that there was some kind of like blogging platforms that were coming up. One would be free thought blogs, one would have been Patheos. And within those blogging networks, there were certain patterns of behavior. This would have been, the late 2000s.
Certain patterns of behavior.
Then in 2011, this sets a backstory that I don't know the details of. But all I know is that there was hostility between these people who were very interested in social justice being a fundamental part of what was going on in the atheism movement, and the people who were more what you might call hardline rationalists. And at the time, certainly I would have said that Richard Dawkins and Sam Harris, these kind of luminaries, were going to be in the hardline rationalist category. But of course, because of the ethical implications that they were drawing out of some of the things about fundamentalist religion, they were also dabbling into some of the critical theory type thing that I would now recognize as being a critical theory of religion.
So we'll touch on a little bit that he brings up Gamergate here. He'll expand on that, I think, a little bit later, or bring it into context with other movements. But you can see that he's making the connections that movements like Gamergate and what happened in the atheist movement are kind of on similar levels, which is something that I've argued from like this side. Like, yes, they were both counter-revolutionary, if you will, reactionary politics. But then there's this also like weird dichotomy that he's making here between what he's going to describe as hardline rationalist thinking with critical theory. And the thing that's really weird about this is he thinks in his mind, I think, that there is sort of like a way to like cleave these two things apart, where that there's a way of doing just completely unbiased, pure rational thought, free of any historical contingencies, free from everything. You're just a completely unbiased rational agent who's just pontificating about the nature of religion. And then the other end of this is like being a critical theorist, being a social justice theorist towards religion, which is to say things like, hey, maybe gay people should get married. That is the more like critical side of things. Whereas somehow there is this like super rational side of it as well. Where I think the two, like, there's no way to like tease apart these things. I sort of hinted to earlier that there is a connection here between social justice movements and atheism, in part because, again, a lot of the reasons why things like the LGBTQ plus movements or feminism, women's movements, all this stuff happened was in relation to a patriarchal, heteronormative religion, Christianity, that oppressed a lot of people who were both gay or a woman. And also it was racially linked because of the history of religion in the United States that justified things like slavery. And so, yes, there is a connection between wanting to push back against religion and realizing its emancipatory character in doing so, right? So you could see why there would be a social component to atheism. Otherwise, who cares? right? Like, okay, what do you get from being an atheist if not the emancipatory thing? If all you get is to be like, hey, Elron, God doesn't exist.
Cool story, bro. Tell it again.
Did you know God doesn't exist?
Yeah, I heard that.
Have you heard about the cosmological argument?
Yeah, no,
Yeah.
yeah. No, I got the ontological one. I got the Pascal's wager thing. No, we're good. We got it all here.
Like, the only reason to have an atheist movement is to go, hey, maybe the way the system was set up before was set up in a way that harmed people. And maybe there's something emancipatory to atheism to say this oppressive thing that was religion is worth pushing back against, right? I mean, that's at least where I think there is some importance to atheism, right? I think, of course, that kind of pushback can go too far in some ways, and like that's something we've already litigated on a previous thing that's up on YouTube. You can go watch that. But the point being is, like, of course it should be emancipatory, and they like to pretend like that somehow the cleavage was brought in by these social activists when somehow it should have been just all about the rational thinking for some reason.
I mean, for Adorno, the cleavage was brought in by student activists, but
Another titty joke. Yes.
sorry, I don't really have much in me to talk about this. Like, atheism is not my thing, so.
No, but like the interesting thing is, though, I think it's important because, like, I do think there is reason to want. I think there is reason to want to join atheism as a emancipatory movement with religious people who also want to fight for emancipation in various ways, right? And to me, there's an importance, I think, in bridging that gap so that you don't have whatever fucking connections that Lindsay is making between the atheist movement and Christian nationalists, which in the end want to destroy atheism. It's fucking, like, it's mind blowing.
Yeah, it is interesting how, like, amongst how the reputation of atheism has kind of like shifted into almost like a, I don't know, like a lot of religious, you know, socialist, communist, leftists, whatever, are like at first glance distrustful of atheists because of how heavily, like, in terms of like the public intellectuals of atheism, how like heavily right-leaning they are, and like how publicly right-leaning people like James Lindsay and Dawkins and whoever the fuck else are. So yeah, like I get that, like, you know, there is need to like free notions of atheism and emancipation from their connections to people like this.
Is Dawkins super heavily right-leaning? He's a fucking asshole.
He
seems like
complicated.
Maybe socially right.
Yeah, I mean, I mean, like, he's product of his time too. Not to say that to defend him. I'm just I mean it in terms of like, I mean in terms of like he'll project like a pro-feminism approach, but his like feminism stopped in the 60s kind of thing.
Okay.
That's what I mean. So in that sense, like, I think a lot of people will say that like he's left because he admits to being pro-feminism, but it's like in that context, it's almost like he's conservatism because he left his like he stopped, like, you know what I mean? He stopped at a certain aspect.
He progressed to a certain point and then stopped there.
So, I don't know. I find like this was like the issue that people had with that article connecting new atheism to the right wing. And like part of me is like, it almost just doesn't matter to me like how far right or what right or like bickering over where you carve it up. I think at the end of the day, it's just like, he's not good.
Yeah.
Like, is that better? Like, it's almost like you don't have to call him right wing. He's just not good. I don't expect him like being pro fascism or something like that, but like he seems okay with capitalism. He seems okay with hating trans people. He seems okay with being against Muslims to a point of like absurdity. So it's like, fuck him, you know. Again, like I still think The Selfish Gene is a phenomenal book. I love that book, and I think it's great. Philosophical insights are in it, and I would recommend people read it. It's just that he turned out to be an asshole. So, or well, I think he always was, but it became more prevalent when he was on Twitter. And we will get to some of Dawkins' bullshit in a bit. So I guess we'll pause on this for now. But yeah, it almost doesn't matter whether they're right wing or not.
So in 2011, something happened. It's been now referred to as ElevatorGate. And this was, in my opinion, the death stroke against the new atheism movement. And so what had happened was there was a conference in Ireland, nice hotel, the whole thing. I don't know the details with tremendous clarity, but a woman named Rebecca Watson was on a panel, if I'm not mistaken, had spoken in that context. And near the end of that evening, of course, at all conferences, it goes into party time and everything. So late in the evening, 2, 3, 4 in the morning, something very late in the evening, she goes back to go to her room, ends up in the elevator in this, of course, very nice hotel, not exactly a dangerous place, at a conference of atheism in Ireland. So we're not talking like she's in, like Darfur or some crazy place. And it's she and a young man, and he says, I really like your talk, something to this effect. Wonder if I could take you to coffee at some point. She says no. The elevator gets to her floor. She gets off the elevator. He does not go with, or maybe it's the other way around. Got to his floor. He got off. End of story. One or the other. Nothing else happened. And except that Rebecca Watson was then shook by this. And in the ensuing days, released a video where she talked to her own camera in what they call the vlog style.
What they call the vlog style. I want to pause it here because I just there are a lot covered there. I first want to say thank you to A Living Lie for following, or You're Living a Lie. Thank you very much for the follow. We're talking about James Lindsay. If you've been here the whole time, continue watching. Ask questions in the chat if you have any. Yes, the Darfur comment was fucking gross.
Oh, for fuck's sake. I didn't think he was going to simultaneously be able to butcher such an easy fucking story and then also insert some little racism there.
Yep.
What year was this video from?
Oh, 2011, and we will watch it for context because
I don't remember. I thought she said it like on the panel. I didn't think she said it in a vlog.
No, so she said it in a vlog. The panel. Okay. She'll explain the history in the video, so that'll become clear.
Like I remember her being on a panel. Like I know the story. I just thought for some reason I thought she like said it publicly before like the vlog, but like it's funny thinking back on it now. I mean, you're gonna show the video, but like it's so tame. It's such a tame fucking comment of like, hey, don't do this. And oh my god.
And You're Living a Lie. If that's sarcasm, let us know. But if you keep going down this path, we will. We don't need your follow. I'll just leave that as a warning, and that's how it goes. Yeah, I think it's the reason I wanted to pause here is because it's going. I will follow you. Okay. I will point out, like, watch how he describes what happens in this vlog, because we're going to watch the vlog, which gives a bit of the background story. But, like, I just want to contrast with the way he describes it to then watching the actual thing. So here's his description of what happens on that vlog.
About how you shouldn't do that because it makes women uncomfortable. They were trapped in an elevator. This is the kind of thing that keeps women out of atheism, blah, blah, blah. Then I think 10 or 15 minute, like, kind of little scoldy feminist rant because she got asked out in an elevator after she gave a talk at a conference in a very nice hotel in not a third world country by somebody who did not pursue anything further. And this got somehow the attention of Richard Dawkins, who
So, okay, we'll pause it there. So, and then we'll get to Richard Dawkins when we get back. But notice how he explained that. Okay. Now, I don't know. I will say, we're not going to watch the entire 8 minutes. I will say that the first little bit, we'll find out where it begins. But the first bit is literally her describing how the conference went. So apparently she's at the conference, had a good time. She met these like robot things. She talks about going on the set of Mythbusters and how cool it was to be on the set of Mythbusters, if everyone remembers that show. So like, you know, it's a pretty chill. She talked about the fact that she's moving. Notice the boxes on the wall. She describes the fact that soon she will unpack the boxes on the shelf and it'll make the setup look a bit nicer, but now it looks a bit of a mess, all that fun stuff, right? So that is the majority, I think, of the video.
As me, as a woman, but
Okay.
problem with sexism in the 80s, and I disagreed with a lot. I was going to talk about blogging and podcasting, but
She's talking about the panel.
a few hours prior to that panel, there was another panel on women atheist activists, and I disagreed with a lot of what happened on that panel, particularly with something that Paula Kirby had said. Paula Kirby doesn't have a problem with sexism in the atheist community, and because of that, she assumes that there is no sexism. So I thought that I would, during my panel, discuss what it's like to communicate atheism as me, as a woman, but from a different perspective from Paula. I don't assume that every woman will have the same experience that I've had, but I think it's worthwhile to publicize the fact that some women will go through this, and that way we can warn women ahead of time as to what they might expect, give them the tools they need to fight back, and also give them the support structure they need to keep going in the face of blatant misogyny. So I was interested in the response to my sort of rambling on that panel.
So she watched another panel and then had her own panel. And I think she mentioned it, but I might not have caught it. But the panel that she was sitting on talking, where she describes this talk, Richard Dawkins was on that panel and was friendly with her afterwards and during, and seemed to enjoy what she had to say on the panel. So that's worth just noting. But we'll see. I think she's going to get into the next part of it.
Which, like this video, was unscripted and rambly, for which I apologize. But the response was really fascinating. The response at the conference itself was wonderful. There were a ton of great feminists there, male and female, and also just open-minded people who had maybe never really considered the way that women are treated in this community, but were interested in learning more. So thank you to everyone who was at that conference who engaged in those discussions outside of that panel. You were all fantastic, and I love talking to you guys. All of you except for the one man who didn't really grasp, I think, what I was saying on the panel, because at the bar later that night, actually at 4 a.m, we were at the hotel bar. 4 a.m, I said, you know, I've had enough, guys, I'm exhausted, going to bed. So I walked to the elevator, and a man got on the elevator with me and said, don't take this the wrong way, but I find you very interesting and I would like to talk more. Would you like to come to my hotel room for coffee? Just a word to the wise here, guys, don't do that. You know, I don't really know how else to explain how this makes me incredibly uncomfortable, but I'll just sort of lay it out that I was a single woman, you know, in a foreign country at 4 a.m. in a hotel elevator with you, just you, and don't invite me back to your hotel room right after I finished talking about how it creeps me out and makes me uncomfortable when men sexualize me in that manner. So, yeah. But everybody else seemed to really get it, and thank you for getting it. Then Aaron posted the video.
So that's it. That's it. That was the scolding feminist. This is what destroyed the atheism community.
We never recovered. We lost a lot of good people that day. Mostly white guys, which I'm okay with, but you know. We didn't lose any good people. Yeah, we just got a lot of trash was taken out. It was a pretty good day.
I'm curious with you, Vienno, how having never watched this, like again, this was 2011, so this is 10 years ago. And this is still such a potent issue within certain atheist circles that James Lindsay is still referencing it as the reason why like atheism has collapsed. So having watched this now, how do you feel?
Damn, this was a fragile movement. Like, I don't even know how they like organized a conference for this to occur at, with how badly they reacted to any criticism. Like, how did they like decide on like room decor or whatever the fuck if they can't handle like, oh yeah, maybe like don't like be creepy in an elevator to me, please. Like not even like, oh, you fucking like deserve to die or anything like that. Like,
yeah, and it was also like the other part of the context that is also missing is that she gave a talk and was probably talking at the bar about the talk that she gave, right? Because that's usually what happens at conferences. And so it was known that she had these feelings about not being sexualized at these conferences, only for this person to like, in a way, sexualize her and ask her back to his hotel room at 4 in the morning.
No, that's unfair. That's unfair. You're assuming their intent by asking someone to come back to your hotel room for, you can't see my eyebrows going up and down, but they're going up and down when I say coffee at 4 a.m. No, you can't. You're making a lot of assumptions there, Jody. You're making a lot of assumptions there, Rebecca. I don't appreciate this.
So that so silly.
That fucking face. That goddamn face.
So, now we're gonna get him to talk about Richard Dawkins, and then we'll go back to. I have the saved messages from Richard Dawkins, so we'll check that out.
Who at the time, of course, was the luminary, and so Richard wrote this very scathing satire titled "Dear Muslima" to the young Muslim girl about how her problems don't matter. You know, the abuses against what would be a legitimate liberal feminism in Islam don't matter because we have poor Rebecca Watson getting asked some coffee in an elevator in a nice hotel, blah, blah, blah. Very sarcastic, very Richard Dawkins. And of course, once Richard Dawkins decided to pour flame on this, the whole thing ignited. And all of a sudden, the issue of feminism and women in atheism became paramount. And so everybody started getting accused of being a sexist. It's the same pattern we're seeing play out all over the world right now, and literally.
So we'll get to that. Now it's happening all over the world, right? Like the same pattern and all that fun shit. So here's the thing. No one really reacted to Rebecca's video. What happened was Rebecca runs, I think she still runs it till this day, a blog called Skepchick. And it was a feminism and skepticism blog. Remember, Rebecca used to be the co-host on a show called Skeptic's Guide to the Universe. And so she had the blog Skepchick, which was like a companion to that sort of. And it talked about the sort of like feminist issues within skepticism. So like, critiquing certain like medical or anti-women medical stuff, or like, being pro-abortion in ways and pointing out like why the anti-abortion movement is wrong and stuff like this. So like that's what a lot of the work they did on Skepchick. And so she had posted a brief outline and then posted that video on her blog. And Richard Dawkins slides onto that blog. Okay. Oh, here, I gotta.
Really everything. People start being.
Oh. Richard Dawkins goes onto the blog and leaves this comment. So I've got the comment quoted out here, and I'll read it in full just so you understand what's happening here. He goes, "Dear Muslima." So this is his comment to a blog. Dear Muslima, stop whining, will you? Yes, yes.
S. Muslim.
Muslima. Sorry.
Muslim.
Yeah, I mean, this
Okay,
is an
never mind,
insult,
actually.
so
Just
who
do it
the
your
fuck
way.
cares?
I mean, it's just like
It's Richard
Lindsay
Dawkins.
said Muslima. Like
Sorry.
a
Muslima.
cow.
Yeah. Stop whining, will you?
No, is it?
Yes, yes. I know you had your genitals mutilated with a razor blade. And yawn. Don't tell me yet again. I know you aren't allowed to drive a car, and you can't leave the house without a male relative, and your husband is allowed to beat you, and you'll be stoned to death if you commit adultery. But stop whining, will you? Think of the suffering your poor American sisters have to put up with. Only this week I heard of one. She calls herself Skepchick. And do you know what happened to her? A man in a hotel elevator invited her back to her room for coffee. I'm not exaggerating. He really did. He invited her back to his room for coffee. Of course she said no, and of course he didn't lay a finger on her. But even so, ... And you, Muslima, think you have misogyny to complain about? For goodness sakes, grow up, or at least grow a thicker skin. Richard. So, when we talk about like the schism that occurred in the atheist movement, it was not because Rebecca posted her fucking thing. Of course, people saw this post, this comment, by one of the people who was like, as James Lindsay pointed out, as being like one of the main figures in atheism, posts whatever the fuck this is as a response to that video that we just watched.
Well, he is one of the four horsemen, so he definitely brought apocalypse to the atheism community, and give him that much.
So he did.
I am content that Dawkins will burn in the eternal fire, so it's fine.
He then responded to some of the criticisms in another comment. And so the other comment was, many people seem to think it obvious that my post was wrong and I should apologize. Very few people have bothered to explain exactly why. The nearest approach I have heard goes something like this. I sarcastically compared Rebecca's plight with that of women in Muslim countries or families dominated by Muslim men. Somebody made the worthwhile point, reiterated here by PZ, who's the blog we're reading right now, that it is no defense of something slightly bad to point to something worse. We should fight all bad things, the slightly bad as well as the very bad. Fair enough. But my point is that the slightly bad thing suffered by Rebecca was not even slightly bad. It was zero bad. A man asked her back to his room for coffee. She said no. End of story. But not everybody sees it as the end of story. Okay, let's ask why not. The main reason seems to be that an elevator is a confined space from which there is no escape. This point has been made again and again in this thread and the other one. No escape? I am now really puzzled. Here's how you escape from an elevator. You press any one of the buttons conveniently provided. The elevator will obligingly stop at a floor. The door will open and you will no longer be in a confined space, but in a well-lit corridor in a crowded hotel in the center of Dublin. No, I obviously don't get it. I will gladly apologize if somebody will calmly and politely, without using the word fuck in every sentence, explain to me what it is that I'm not getting, Richard.
Read that first comment, please.
Oh, here? We could put Richard in an elevator with a big booba blocking the door and see how quickly he skates. Does this guy have no imagination / empathy? Big Bubba? I guess I put booba.
Big Bubba. Yeah, I don't know where you got Big Booba from. Well, I know where you got it. I won't tell people.
It's
but,
all Vienna making all the boob jokes.
Yeah.
You know you've got a killer argument when you have to fabricate a big old straw man to explain. Like, I mean, like, this is it. I mean, like, she explained why it made her uncomfortable. She gave all the context. To say that it's, like, zero bad is, like, so pathetic. It's clear that you have no understanding and no, empathy, right? Your criticisms only make my posting worse. So again, that's why there was, you know, of course there would have been pushback to Rebecca's video, and it probably would have been dealt with like any sexism is dealt with, which is like, you point out like, hey, we don't like you, you're a sexist. But here, all of a sudden, one of the leading figures in this atheist community, comes out with something this racist, Islamophobic, sexist, just fucking ignorant. And everyone lost their shit for a good reason. And then the reaction to the people losing their shit for a good reason ended up leading to things like Gamergate and like all the other reactionary movements that we see. How fucking crazy is that? All right.
But time is amazing. Time is a gift that keeps on giving.
Because here's the thing: is who's prevalent in the Gamergate thing? That was mostly led by people like Sargon of Akkad, who got their start yelling at Anita Sarkeesian here, or not Anita, Rebecca Watson, and then Anita Sarkeesian and all that, right? So like,
I'm pretty sure his first,
Underfoot.
like he had 2 videos. I feel like one of his first 2 videos was Anita. His channel's lost to time now, and I also don't want to look it up. But I think like he really did start with Anita. We went after the video games, and people just lost their shit.
And I think like that was in response to Thunderfoot making videos on this. And Thunderfoot again initially responded to the Rebecca thing on the side of Richard Dawkins, and
Of course he did.
right. And Thunderfoot immediately pivoted from the atheism is being invaded by feminists to the gaming community is being invaded by feminists, and then Gamergate, and the rest is history. And then we had Donald Trump.
Oh, God. Yeah, at the end of the day, we really have to blame white men for the collapse of atheist movements.
Like it's just so embarrassing that this became like an issue. And then like he expands on like poor Richard Dawkins here in a second. So let's hear this.
Accused of being sexists. You see people that are organizing conferences being told that if they invite the wrong people, their conference is going to be accused of misogyny, being exclusionary to women. If they don't put enough women on panels, don't give enough women speaking gigs, if they even have people like Richard Dawkins come speak, that's going to be a problem. And they'll boycott the conference. Maybe they'll call a bomb squad and say that, or bomb threat in, or shut it down and be disruptive. The whole style of activism that we've now become familiar with was playing out throughout this. And my view, watching this as somebody who had hoped to be participatory in the movement to a greater degree than I was great disappointment, because the doors of opportunity were closing. It was very clear that the number of conferences was going from a lot and growing to very few, and nobody wanting to have them, and nobody wanting to go to them. I talked to people who were in the atheism movement, who had been big players in it, and they started taking essentially something like their children or their spouse or something like as a chaperone to avoid getting accused of sexual misconduct behind closed doors, where maybe nothing happened, it's totally fabricated, all the way down to something being misinterpreted. And this, of course, this is a chilling environment, and so the conferences weren't making money. They weren't drawing headliners anymore. All of the normal things that happen the dominoes started to fall, and eventually you can't have a movement if there's no energy and money making the thing continue. And so the center dropped out. So you had the people who were atheism hardcores, one side or the other, who were still involved, but everybody less interested than that. This isn't what I'm here for. I'm not interested in going to a squabble fest. I don't want to go listen to 10 feminist panels. I wanted to listen to Sam Harris or whoever it happens to be. And he got disinvited, or I don't think Sam Harris ever actually got disinvited. Richard did. Richard Dawkins did get disinvited, and it's probable that that stress of that is what led to his stroke a few years ago from
Listen to how, again, he's going to talk about grievance studies and victim culture and all this bullshit. And he's complaining about, like, I used to really enjoy going to these conferences, but as soon as the broads started speaking up, like, I had to bring people as chaperones so I wouldn't get accused of sexual assault. So I just, the conferences weren't fun anymore, and like no one was having a good time, and it was all sad, and I couldn't go. I wanted to have my good time, but they wouldn't let me have my good time anymore. And then poor Richard Dawkins, who wrote that bigoted screed, he went and had a heart attack because they disinvited him, and
Just to throw this out there, if you having a good time at a conference makes you fearful that you're going to be accused of sexual misconduct, You need to redefine your idea of a good time.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm not sure how many conferences I've been to. I haven't been accused of sexual misconduct.
No.
I've had a good time at all of them.
It really is. Like, again, a lot of people can push back because you're using this social justice language. He's being a fragile white dude who's so just sad that some other people had to come in and ruin his good time. When it's like, what about the people who weren't having a good time? What about the people who were being sexually harassed? What about the people who we find out were being sexually assaulted by people like David Silverman,
Oh God.
Lawrence Krauss, Michael Shermer, all the people who started turning out to be sex pests at these fucking conferences? Like, there was a reason why people were coming out and speaking to this, because it became like a legitimate, it was a Me Too before there was a Me Too, where we were realizing that a lot of these people who were like lead figures in this movement were fucking predators. And there was a network of people, a whisper network started becoming around, like there was one for Harvey Weinstein, where people knew about this, but like weren't coming forward because they knew if they came forward, they would be ruined because of it. And they were ruined because of it, you know? Like, Rebecca Watson's was like drugged through the mud because of just merely speaking a little bit about this, you know?
Off topic, but somewhat on topic. I know this is an unpopular opinion among some people, but I think it's good that there are real tangible consequences for sexual misconduct being put in place at conferences and among different communities. I think it's good. And I personally don't care if someone commits like a mistake and they're then put through these consequences. I think that's the point of consequences, so that we either A, don't do them, or if you do them, you have to live with it. I think it's a good thing.
Yeah,
I agree with it.
100%.
It's not against, like, if you do make a mistake, you can't be rehabilitated, but it's like, yeah, you did this bad thing. We need checks against potential power abuses. You committed a power abuse. It's time to go rehabilitate. And while you're doing that, you can't have all the nice things. That's the consequence. It's a good thing.
So I want to comment on the Richard Dawkins having a stroke thing. So this is an interesting turn of events, which was, it was for the New England, what was it? The Northeast Conference on Science and Skepticism, Nexus. Okay? Interesting enough, this conference is run by Steven Novella and Jay Novella and a few others. The Novella brothers run the podcast Skeptic's Guide to the Universe, which Rebecca Watson was a co-host on that show for 10 years before she left. Okay? 2 years after she left the show, they were inviting Richard Dawkins to be the main speaker at this Skeptic conference, even though they knew that Richard Dawkins was a piece of shit to their co-host back in 2011, right? So this was in 2016 when they invited him. And so they were already sort of getting shit for the fact of, like, why are you inviting this person? Like, this isn't a cool look. Then for Richard Dawkins, I think it was a week or 2 weeks before the conference started, retweeted out this video that was like a really disgusting video comparing feminism to ISIS. And Richard Dawkins just retweeted this. And this was after Richard Dawkins was going on some like weird tirade against that kid, I think his name is Ahmed Muhammad, who deconstructed a clock and brought it to class, and the teacher freaked out and thought it was a bomb threat. And Richard Dawkins would not let that go for like weeks, and in ways that was like racially and Islamophobic, racially insensitive and Islamophobic. And so it's like there was things building up to this, till eventually Nexus was like, okay, we're disinviting Richard Dawkins, right? And the tip of the iceberg was when Richard posted that video comparing feminism to ISIS. Okay, so that's why he was kicked from that conference, and then he had a stroke, even though there's no evidence that the two were related. But now James Lindsay wants to say the reason, It was so mean what they did to poor Richard Dawkins. He ended up having a stroke. Like, maybe Richard Dawkins shouldn't have been a complete sexist prick. That's, sounds pretty good to me.
I think that was the so-called Nexus conference in Canada. And so the whole thing just kind of started to melt down. It was, like I said, dominoes falling, because everybody was afraid that a Me Too style allegation of sexual misconduct was around every corner. And then the other side was arguing, of course, that if you're afraid of that, it must be because you're actually guilty, right? You must have something hidden that's going to come out.
No. The issue isn't that you might be guilty. It's just like there's a bunch of red flags there if you're against that. Because if you're coming from the presupposition that well, why are you trying to put these rules against sexual misconduct at these conferences and getting mad about it, it's probably because you're a creep. I've been to a lot of conferences with that have rules at the conference against things like sexual misconduct, The boob protest caused a heart attack. Being canceled caused a stroke. It's super fragile white dudes. Super fragile white dudes are the bane of this fucking society. My God. It's more of the red flag if you want to prioritize and whose comfort you think simply doesn't matter. Yeah, exactly. I mean, how does that, how does that ruin your comfort? It's like, you're mad because they want to implement a policy saying don't sexually harass women. And you're like, well, I don't get to have fun anymore. Like, it's such a weird, fucking disgusting argument.
And so the whole environment became toxic, and the bottom fell out.
That was
eventually,
the toxic thing, right?
it's kind of this weird shell of what it used to be. There are some people who try to keep it alive or are still interested in it. But for the most part, the group that had branded themselves Atheism Plus, which was literally Atheism Plus Social Justice in those words, and declared it the name for what's happening. That was Richard Carrier specifically said that before the Atheism Plus people Me Too'd him and wrecked him. And I don't think he's a big fan of that way of thinking anymore.
I love, wrecked him. Richard Carrier came out to hold some pretty creepy views and was called out for it. And I think he was sexually harassing people at conferences, even though he was someone who joined this Atheist Plus movement. And then you had people being like, see, even the feminists are sex creeps, and therefore you can't trust feminism. And, it was a whole ordeal over that whole shtick. But, yeah, so, Richard Carrier is a prick, too. This isn't really hard to figure out. Don't sexually harass people, even if you're someone who professes to be a feminist. Don't sexually harass people, Seems pretty clear. Now it's I didn't agree with everything about Atheism Plus to a certain degree, because I don't agree with everyone all the time anyways. But the idea was they were trying to carve out a space after all this shit was going down by going, look, we're going to be atheism, but our focus is the social justice aspect because that's important to our atheism. And we're not going to side with you who are now throwing a shit fit after this whole elevator bullshit. So it's whatever, that's fine. Let them fucking do that. But then people started losing their mind that Atheism Plus was even doing this, because again, atheism is only supposed to be about bros sitting down, discussing the cosmological argument, and not maybe about the fact that maybe religious conservatism has banned gay people in the country, And maybe that's something worth pushing back against. It's the funniest kind of telling on yourself. Imagine if there was a new rule saying you couldn't give rim jobs to ducks, and you were one of the people saying, I oppose this rule. No one can have any fun anymore with these regressive standards. What is someone supposed to infer about your views on ducks? Yeah, exactly. And the thing is, you wouldn't be immediately canceled. You would just be looked upon with suspicion, right? Anyways.
That whole thing just kept going with the same kind of smear campaigns as the only thing that really retained strength. It was the people who had come in to kind of leverage themselves into positions of significance within a movement without having anything all that much more interesting to say than I'm a woman or I'm a queer woman or something, and why isn't this movement paying enough attention to me?
That feels a lot like projection. I mean, like the whole argument prior to this was, why isn't this movement catering to everything that I want? They keep changing the rules, and I'm all upset about it. And I was like, and they want to come in and they want to make it all about them?
I can't believe these women are asking for a place at the table. Fucking unheard of.
And they weren't just saying, I'm a woman, make it all about me. Like, these conferences still had talks about things like Bigfoot. They still had talks about how religion is silly or like whatever. Like, it wasn't like the whole thing was being taken over by like feminism. It was more about like, there's again connections between patriarchal religion and feminism. There's a reason why feminism might be against patriarchal religion. And so there are going to be feminism within the atheist movement for good reason, I think.
You want to hear like a really unpopular opinion about why I think atheism conferences started to die off?
James Lindsay specifically?
I mean, I think James Lindsay is definitely a factor in it, but no, I think it was largely the internet, and we're seeing this now with like academic conferences in the post-COVID era. Is even though we all want to go back and see each other, we're realizing we could do it virtually, and like the modern atheist movement really was virtual. So once you got past like the mystique of seeing Richard Dawkins in person, like that's great, but do you want to spend another $500-800 to go do it again? I don't think so. And it's like you said, there's only so many times that you can hear Richard Dawkins say, I wrote a new book about science and how religion is dumb. Like, all right, Rich, that's the 12th one this month.
I think it's ironic because I think in a bit he's going to make a similar sort of argument about why like he's no longer talking about atheism anymore. And it's like that's why the atheism movement I think has sort of died down, because it's like it would be different if it offered something, if it had like a purpose. If that purpose was social justice, then or things like the Freedom for Religions Foundation, like that would be a good reason to like have activism and like a movement atheism, right? But if it's just to sit around discussing the cosmological argument, then of course it's going to get boring after a while, because it's like, how many times have I heard that fucking story, you know?
Dunk on young Earth creationists for the next 2,000 years.
You know, and we visited on that one stream a couple of nights ago. We revisited, you know, Banana Man and Peanut Butter Man.
Right.
Like, but again, like that is
Those...
but that was like us nostalgically going back to that point and reminiscing about it. But like, imagine if you're just still doing that day in and day out. Like,
that's the thing. We did it in like 10 minutes, and that was that. We were done. We figured out the problem with young Earth creationists in 10 minutes. We didn't even need to watch Thunderfoot's however many part video series on why they're fucking stupid. And that's the thing. There's so much fucking content in like atheism dunking on religion. Like years worth of content. How many videos does Thunderfoot alone have?
yeah.
Too fucking many. I'm not gonna go pay $2,000 to fly out to Ohio to see fucking the reanimated corpse of Richard Dawkins pretend to debate some guy. I'm not doing it. I'm sorry.
And that's all. Like, I think there was atheism communities on like both campuses that I've been on. Like, there's the things in which like the community aspects of atheism have hung around for good reason, I think, because something like community is something that people want. That's something that like an atheist might not feel comfortable going to like a Christian church or something like that to get the community. So it's like you have your atheist community to meet up with, right? But that's different than going to like these conferences and shit like that. Which is why it's like, I don't think like in polls, atheism is still increasing. It's not like this is a phenomenon that's going away, right? It's just no one wants to go hang around James Lindsay and discuss fucking science anymore, you know?
I think they're all James Lindsay too. That's the worst part about it. Like James is like James is the avatar for the prototypical annoying skeptic. Like they're all just James Lindsay.
Yeah.
And I can't deal with James Lindsay on his own. I don't want to go hang around just a bunch of like 500 of these khakis wearing blue shirt motherfuckers looking uncomfortable all the time, tipping their fedoras as they talk about, I don't even know what the fuck they talk about. Banana.
What about
I
what
can't do
about
it.
the white man who's being left out of the discourse? What about me?
Oh my God. No, thank you. Get out of here.
This sort of void of excellence that leads people to try to leverage other avenues to success. And it was pretty apparent. And like I said, I think it just melted the whole movement down. So I watched this unfold.
I love he's talking like the feminists were leveraging things for their own success. Meanwhile, he was a PhD in math, couldn't find a job, decided to go dabble in some other things, and then decided he was an expert on issues that he didn't get his PhD in, and was doing the atheist circuit, talking about things he had no expertise in, and somehow it's the feminists that are leveraging the movement to get success.
Also, the feminists are leveraging the movement to not get sexually harassed.
Yeah.
Like that's
Yes,
that
they
is the
didn't
goal.
achieve success.
That's it. That's all it is. Like,
Yeah.
not trying to make money. Not trying to like. Okay.
No, it's just like, hey, maybe our issues still need to be addressed. That maybe there's a reason why they're not being addressed, because most of the like key figures that get promoted at these conferences are all white dudes. And so maybe we should have a sit at the table and have our issues discussed as well, because they're also important considering the harms that religion cause to women. And maybe we should talk about those as well, on top of the fact that maybe we shouldn't have harassment at all these conferences we attend.
But Cody, remember, everybody must be grifting because James is grifting.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, totally.
and that's not projection. That's just obvious fact, of course.
God damn it, there's so much content in this video. I think, here's the thing is, we're not going to get to the second video. I will save it for their next day, maybe next Wednesday stream, maybe. We'll continue our James Lindsay legacy. But we will for you, Viano. He mentions the same thing about Marx in this as well, so we will still get to read some Marx for you, okay?
Thank you.
Over those 4 years, 2011 to 2015, at which point, I mean, technically, free thought blogs is still a thing. They still call me a white man like once a month or something like that.
Because you are, in fact, a white man, James.
My genitals or something. They still go after Sam Harris and Richard Dawkins like it's the only thing they know how to do, like anybody on earth is actually doing that anymore. It's sort of a sad thing, but that's really all it's become. So I do think I think it's actually one of three.
So I love this. He's complaining about free thought blogs spending all their times going after Richard Dawkins and Sam Harris, even though Richard Dawkins and Sam Harris are still big figures that are still going around spewing hate-filled shit that they have to call out. Meanwhile, James Lindsay has been griping about fucking cultural Marxism and how like all these feminists are ruining our movement for, again, about the same time period. And yet he's like... Yet it's the free thought blog people that need to get a life and like start doing something else. Not James Lindsay, who's doing the exact same fucking thing.
Hello, my rebels. Hello, my rebels. I'm a good boy. I'm a weirdo.